Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really pleased to do our now second year of our mid-year event. So this is an opportunity for us to connect with you all and provide some additional training and development. So we have a couple things on the agenda today, and so I'm going to just quickly make a few statements before we get started. If you want to ask any questions, feel free to use the chat box. I think we're all pretty facile with Zoom now. And during the discussion, just make sure you unmute yourself. I think most people have their names, but if you don't have your name listed, it's helpful if you can change that so we can know who's talking. We know some of you, but not all of you. In terms of just a brief reminder of where we are with the program, we're at our mid-year event. And so today we have two keynote speakers who are going to talk to you about conflict management. And for those of you that remember the session we did early on at the kickoff, where I talked about individual styles of managing, relating when things are well and when you're in conflict, hopefully this will resonate with you and build on that knowledge. And so then we will have another structured event, and that's at the end, and that's our graduation and mentor recognition that we will do virtually. And in between now and May 17th, you will have the opportunity to continue to meet with your learning community mentors and your one-on-one mentor. So just as a reminder, I'm kind of handling the one-on-one mentoring relationships, and Kathy is the liaison for the mentoring communities. So you can always feel free to reach out to us. We haven't heard a whole lot from people, so we assume kind of no news is good news. But if you're running into any trouble or having difficulty connecting or anything at all, feel free to reach out to Kathy regarding the learning communities or me regarding your one-on-ones. So today we're going to spend about half of the time on a session on conflict management, which will be jointly led by Nate Spell and Aaron Lee. And then following that, we will have some kind of rotating speed mentoring sessions. So we did this our first year and it was really successful. We were able to do it live, so unfortunately we'll be doing it virtually today. But what we did in designing this was, if you remember, we reached out to the group and asked what kinds of topics you thought would be most developmental and beneficial. And so then we picked those topics, and we'll have 3 sessions where people will rotate through the different groups. So we have one session that I'll lead dealing with mentoring challenges, another session on identifying funding, and a third session on networking and finding collaborators. And each of these sessions, so you'll get all of them, and you'll just be randomly assigned to one of them to start with. They'll be about 18 minutes in duration, and then Lauren will give us a warning and shoot you back in. And Kathy will be leading the identifying funding, and Carlos will be leading the networking and finding collaborators. And so these are kind of free form. We'll probably all handle them a little bit differently, but it's really an opportunity for you to ask questions and for us to troubleshoot and give you advice about any of these topics. And then we will bring you back into the room for a minute just to do a few very quick wrap up announcements. So that's where we're heading. That's where we're heading today. So I think with that, I will stop my screen share and I will hand it over to Nathan and Aaron. So Nathan's a professor of medicine at Emory. He's also the Associate Dean for Educational and Professional Development. And Aaron is a Human Resources Administrator in the School of Medicine at Emory as well. So I think that'll be a nice mix of kind of academic as well as kind of practical perspective on conflict management. So with that said, I'm going to, I guess I've already been overtaken here, but I will stop my screen share, and we'll see you back again for the mentoring sessions.
All right, terrific. It's great to see all of you. And I'm Nate Spell, and I've already been introduced, but I'll just tell you that my background is in quality improvement and patient safety before I came to be Associate Dean. And this topic of conflict management turns out to be absolutely key to providing safe, good quality care. And so it's been something we've been teaching to our medical teams for quite a long time, and I'm looking forward to the application to your research teams as well.
And hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Lee. As Lillian said, I am the Human Resources Administrator for the Department of Medicine and the Basic Sciences departments here at Emory. To Nate's point, in my role in human resources, I, of course, get a lot of experience, both helping to manage conflict, coaching supervisors, staff members, employees about conflict management. Nate and I both feel that this is such an extremely important topic. And I feel confident saying that each of you, no matter what role you are in or how many years of experience you may have, are still facing or will face workplace conflicts in your roles. And I think it will be important for you to have the tools and the skill set to effectively navigate those conflicts. So our goal for today is to simply provide you with some background information, some strategies, and some guidance that you'll hopefully find useful. As Lillian said, of course, we're all very familiar with Zoom and web meetings now, but we will have a combination of feedback from you all in the chat box that Nate and I will continually monitor. We'll have some questions that are, things will open up to the group, so you can unmute at those times and begin to have conversation. We'll also do some breakout sessions in our group as well, so you can have some smaller group discussion. So I see Nate's put the agenda up just to kind of walk through what we're going to go through today. First, we'll spend some time, discussing what conflict is and putting that into perspective. After that, we will briefly review some frameworks that exist for responding to conflict. Of course, in the limited time we have this morning, we can't go into depth about each of them as much as we would love to, but we'll at least give you some baseline information for each of these frameworks. As we continue, we'll dive deeper into some guiding principles that should be adhered to in times of conflict and how we should prepare for those issues and how to address those issues. And then finally, we'll spend some time putting all that information into practice. And of course, Nate and I will give you some links to other resources and tools that you can access even after we conclude our conversation today, for those of you all who want additional resources in self-study.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, we hope to make this as interactive as we can possibly make it, even though it's on Zoom. So feel free to use the chat box. Whichever us is not speaking will be looking there, right. And or just unmute and interrupt. I think we're a small enough group that we can manage that. Or you can also raise your hand in the participants box.
Exactly. All right, so let's dive in. We're gonna, I guess, first get used to responding via chat. So let's take a second here in the beginning and let's just discuss this first very general question. In your opinion, what does it mean to be in conflict? So you can take just a minute here and jump in the chat box. Tell us what, in your opinion, it means to be in conflict. I see some responses beginning to roll in. So I see, specific items like conflict of interest. I see someone whose definition was when two parties disagree and there's no common ground, disagreement or differing opinions, to have differing viewpoints where compromise becomes difficult, when people have different goals or objectives that cannot be resolved, to disagree can be various or on various grounds. Yeah. Again, all these are great responses, and really, hit to the nature of what conflict is. I had a very brief definition listed here of conflict or workplace conflict being when two or more people, two or more groups, or two or more policies or anything of that nature have opposing views on the same issue. So I think that's a very important differentiation or a very important point to make, is that we're talking about when individuals are looking at the same issue and have differing or opposing viewpoints, and that's what we're trying to assist you all with being able to resolve in a workplace setting today. So our next question, we want to just you take some time and answer in the chat box. If you had to describe how conflict makes you feel, and you can, if you want to narrow it down to just a one-word answer, feel free to do so. But how does conflict make you feel when you're in the midst of conflict? Tell me how you feel. Uncomfortable and anxious seem to be the two that are coming up most commonly right now. Stressed, very good. Frustrated, also another very common response that we hear. Uncomfortable, stressed, anxious, and frustrated. Those are all very reasonable responses when we are facing conflict. And I think as we move on, we'll talk a little bit later on about being able to own those feelings and being aware of those feelings as we begin to address conflict. This next question I want to ask, we won't do a chat. I kind of want to have, you all unmute if possible, and let's begin to have some discussion. But the next question is conflict always bad? Or to put it another way, can anyone describe how conflict might actually be beneficial if you feel that it's not always bad? So instead of chat, feel free to unmute and let's get some responses from you all about A, is conflict always bad? And if you're saying no, it's not, what are some scenarios or how can conflict actually be beneficial?
I would like to say no, not always. In one way that I see it can be beneficial is that it can result in more rational discussion and a more rational decision over a topic, which is less unbiased.
Very good. Any other responses?
I agree with that. I think,
go ahead.
I agree with that. I would just add to it. I think if you are able to overcome the conflict with all parties being on board and working towards that resolution, then that can be very team building in the process as well.
That's good.
You can make your group stronger.
Yeah, the process of actually working through can yield team cohesiveness, can do a lot of great things for the team environment. That's a very good perspective. I thought I saw one more other person unmute for a second.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially when you asked, how does conflict make you feel? I was going to respond, conflict is actually good. So I encourage, I'm not going to say I use the word conflict, but when I have team meetings and stuff like that, I really encourage for everyone to voice their opinion. I feel that there's no growth if there is no conflict.
Right. That's a very good point. And I think even the feelings that we mentioned, the sometimes frustration, anxiety, lack of comfort, those can exist even, as we acknowledge that conflict can be beneficial. I think, in a lot of cases, you can still have unease about the process, even though it might have some benefits to you as an individual or to the group. So I think those are all very, very good points. Anyone else want to jump in before we move forward? Excellent. Next slide, Nate. And again, we've already kind of covered this, our simple definition of workplace conflict. But again, it was two or more people who have opposing views on the same issue. And as we discuss this further, we'll dive a bit deeper into some ways to resolve conflict, how to own our feelings and be aware of our own feelings in the midst of conflict. And then we will hopefully provide you all with some great strategies about how to move forward. So another area that I want you all to either unmute or feel free to use the chat. But as we begin to discuss some specifics in the rest of this presentation, want to get some feedback from you all about what are some of the issues that you see in your own work groups that tend to cause conflict. Again, let's not put any identifiers or say anyone's name specifically, but what are some things that tend to cause conflict in your work groups? Is it lack of understanding of procedures or policy, lack of role clarity? It could be any of those things, but just want to hear from you all about in your work groups, what are the areas that tend to cause conflict?
In my area, research is a research interest.
Research interest?
Yeah.
See, someone in the chat said teaching load. I'm guessing the expectations and the ability to meet those expectations in terms of the amount of teaching that's taking place. Anyone else?
I think also in many details, for example, how would you like to write a research paper?
Okay.
I would also say just poor communication, or miscommunications, that can result in someone thinking that is what was requested, required. So yeah, poor communication that can sort of decompose and result in conflict.
Okay. Very good. I see in the chat box, someone mentioned differences in opinion on patient management if multiple consultants are on the case. So again, you have different approaches trying to solve the same problem, which is very common. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of the source of conflict, what I've tended to find that usually the source of conflicts in the workplace can be attributed to or assigned to one of these four categories. And what you're looking at is a framework that describes characteristics that are typically found in high functioning teams. So each of these in a high functioning team is typically in place. You'll have some specific scenarios where not all of these exist and teams are still high functioning, but most high functioning teams do have each of these four characteristics or traits. So even in the feedback you all gave, what I've seen is I can pretty easily attribute a lot of those to one of these four categories. And I hope you keep those in mind as we look to find the source of conflict as we hope to resolve those. So we'll go through each of these individually. The first trait of a high functioning team is cohesiveness, where it says that all team members feel included, there is mutual support and caring. All members feel they have something to contribute and they feel valued for their contribution. So that's one function of a high functioning team, one trait of a high functioning team. The second, which someone mentioned as a source of potential conflict, is communication. In high functioning teams, there is uninhibited communication. It feels safe for everyone to communicate and contribute their own thoughts. Communication in both ways, top down and bottom up, is clear, it's unambiguous and effective at achieving the desired goals. And then when conflicts arise, the conflicts are managed openly and with mutual respect. The third is role clarity, where each member understands their own role. Each member knows what is expected of him or her and of other team members, and each individual role is connected to the overall goals and in service to the team overall. And then finally, effective teams have goal and means clarity. So the purpose of the team and all the goals are clearly understood by everyone on the team. The way that the team will function to achieve the goals that are set is understood. And then the measures of success are defined and reviewed periodically. So again, as we were discussing some of the conflicts that you all have seen in your own work groups or in your own teams, I think in a lot of ways we can draw those back or tie those into one of these areas where it might be a deficiency, whether it's a temporary or a momentary deficiency or a longer term deficiency, whether it is certain team members not feeling included, not feeling supported, not feeling that their contribution is valued, whether it is a lack of clear or uninhibited communication, whether there's a lack of clarity about roles, who's doing what, and knowledge of what's expected of them, or if there's a lack of clarity about goals and the way that individuals are expected to achieve those goals. I think in a lot of cases we can use these four as a baseline for determining where our conflicts might be arising from. Any questions about this framework? Any comments or any feedback about this? I'm not sure if you all have seen this before, but any initial thoughts about these four different characteristics of a high functioning team and how they could play into potential conflict? Okay, not hearing anything, so we'll move on to our next slide, which is just some initial frameworks of action. As I said in the beginning of our presentation, there are a number of different frameworks or approaches that can be used to address conflict. And of course, due to time constraints and the limitations of our time today, we won't be able to dive too deeply into each of these, but Nate and I wanted to provide you with some general information about these approaches so that you could do further research on your own. And each of these might be applicable to different scenarios or different conflicts that you face. So the first that's listed here is just the feedback approach, the feedback model. And this is one that is used to promote awareness and growth and self-governance on your teams. In this model, the goal is simply to provide colleagues or whoever you are communicating with clear communication about the specific action that you would like him or her to change, the impact of that behavior, suggestions for what could be done differently, but it's really, we're gaining understanding and providing feedback. Anything to add to that one, Nate, about that feedback model?
No, I think that's great.
Okay. The next one you've probably heard is a very, very popular approach, which is the crucial conversations model. The crucial conversations model is something that we use when we are faced with situations that have high emotion, high stakes, differing opinions. So this is a set of tools and a framework that we use when the stakes are higher and we have differing opinions on a specific subject. The third is the change management model or change management techniques. This model provides guidance when you're attempting to support or engage individuals in your work teams to successfully adopt change and drive specific outcomes. I'm sure, as we've said earlier, that many of you have incorporated change management techniques, whether you were aware of it or not, this past year as our organizations have responded to the pandemic and responded to a switch to a more virtual environment in some cases. So it's all about supporting your colleagues and your team with adopting and responding to change. The next one, negotiation techniques, are important as we attempt to find common ground and come to an agreement with someone with whom we initially differ. I think we're all very familiar with the goal of negotiation. Again, we're trying to find a common ground with someone who we initially are not in agreement with. Confrontation is the next model. This can be useful when behaviors need immediate action or correction. It involves a direct expression of your point of view and your feelings, and hopefully an invitation for the other parties to also directly express their views and feelings. I know sometimes we hear the word confrontation and it has a negative connotation, but what we're really saying with confrontation is, we need immediate correction. So we're going to address this head on. We're going to really clearly communicate to the individual or individuals who we are in conflict with our viewpoint, also take the time to hear theirs, with the goal being that as we have or take this confrontation on, we'll be able to find common ground or resolve it in the moment. And then finally, the authority role approach. This approach is what I like to call command decisions, which is we have an individual in leadership or an authority position who has to set a clear guideline, a clear expectation. It could be based off of time constraints where we don't have the ability to take the time to get feedback or negotiate common ground. We could be in an emergent situation, and because of that, the person in the authority role, the authority figure, would have to be the one who sets a clear expectation and provides clear steps moving forward, and potentially provide or communicate what the consequences are of failure to meet that expectation. So that's more of an authority role. We're in a time constraint. There are certain situations that have to happen, and me in my role as the leader, I have to set the clear expectation of what happens moving forward. Any feedback on any of those, Nate, you want to add before we move on?
No, I think what we'll find is that there are some common elements among them. And it's nice to have a whole bunch of different approaches in your toolkit, because the situation may change, and any one of these approaches you may find helpful.
Yeah, and what I found is a lot of times you'll to Nate's point, you'll use multiple approaches. So you might begin just getting feedback, and then it transitions into let's negotiate and find common ground. It might be a confrontation or us having direct communication initially, and then again finding that common ground or using some crucial conversation techniques. So it's not a you choose one, but more of our ability to get this entire toolkit at our disposal and use pieces as we need. So as we move to the next slide, just a few tips to keep in mind with any approach. What we found is that the chances of success are increased when individuals who are addressing conflict are first mindful of their own feelings. That's why we asked initially, how do you feel when you're in conflict? I think it's very important as you are preparing to address conflict to know whether you are entering it, am I frustrated? Am I angry? Am I uncertain or confused? And being aware of those feelings, as those feelings could drive the overall goal of your approach. So if I'm uncertain or confused, the goal might be I am seeking understanding. If I am frustrated. The goal might be, again, to listen to another viewpoint that maybe might resolve my frustration, or it might guide you to postpone addressing it while you hopefully can help your frustration or anger subside. So I think being aware of those feelings is very important as you begin to address any conflict. Committing to listen deeply, as we mentioned in one of our previous models, seeking to understand, not only communicate my viewpoint, but also understand the viewpoint of the individual or individuals who seemingly have an opposing view. And the last two, maintaining awareness of the interaction while in the conversation, being active in the conversation so that you can respond, and then staying grounded in the core values and the goal of the conversation. So I know I've been in conflicts where I've come in, with the thought that I'm seeking to understand. And then, I look up in 5 minutes and I'm trying to win versus sticking to my initial goal of trying to understand. So I think being aware of your goal and some of the core values that we'll speak to later on is going to be very important as we begin to approach any conflict resolution strategy. So we'll move into, I guess, one of our first, discussion points, our first scenarios. And what we want to do here is we're going to actually read through this scenario, and then we're going to do some breakout groups where you all can discuss this in a smaller group setting, try to determine what the nature of the conflict is. And I see that Nate put into the chat a Google Doc link that has the presentation in case you want to refer back to some of the traits of a high functioning team that we discussed, that you can usually point a conflict to one of those. And also any of our previous slides. But we're going to do some breakout groups where we will discuss the nature of the conflict, or which area of the framework may be the cause of the conflict, and also how you might go about addressing it initially. So we'll read through this scenario as a group, and then you'll be put into smaller groups for about 4 or 5 minutes to discuss, and then we'll come back together and share what we've discussed with the overall group. So here's our scenario. You have a medium-sized research group with a research coordinator, 2 research nurses, and a clinical research fellow. Things are going smoothly until COVID hits, and then your research coordinator and one of the nurses who have small children are trying to manage childcare, school, and a full-time job. Daycare has closed and school is virtual. Nanny services have nothing to offer. You are sympathetic to their situation, but you need their help in moving everything to virtual and in holding virtual patient visits. Their inability to be available during the school day has overburdened your other research nurse and the fellow. With a grant deadline looming, stresses are mounting. So this is our scenario. So what we're going to do now, as I said, we're going to break out into some smaller groups. You'll have the link to the Google Docs presentation. If you haven't already clicked that, please do so you have access to the slides in case you want to refer back. And we'll just have a 4 to 5 minute discussion in our groups about this scenario. Try to identify what the potential nature of the conflict is, and then how you might go about initially addressing or resolving that. Excellent, thank you, Lauren. Looks like we have everyone back, so hopefully you all had some great discussion in your breakout rooms. Let's start with our breakout room number 1. Does someone want to kind of give us an idea of what you all discussed, what you all determined was the nature of the conflict, and how you might go about deciding to address it?
I don't think we remember our group numbers.
Oh, sorry, Lauren, do you have those group numbers?
Yep, so group number 1 had Dr. T, Dr. Livingston, Megan, yes.
So we
Yes,
didn't group numbers, apparently. So I was going to say, we just, some of the things we talked about, well, what I was thinking was that it's just a case of reorganization due to an emergency situation that, the team really, just has to reorganize some things. I don't think it's a conflict as yet, potential to be a conflict. However, everyone, as we know, during COVID, we've all had to shift and pivot, take up additional work, change things around. So I think it's really just a meeting or conversation or figuring out ways to address the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Livingston.
Group 2 had Dr. Munich, Laura Herrick, and Calvin Yee. I'm not sure if anybody in that group wants to go.
Yeah, I think we discussed about, so this is an unusual situation and we need to have a upfront discussion, communication among the whole group to discuss what is our new expectation. So what is the workload, what is the resource we have, like what everyone can offer, and can we get additional resource, get additional help outside of the group. And if we agree that the current resource could not help us achieve the goal, the grant, then we may need to readjust our expectation, remove some of those workload.
Very good. Excellent.
And then group 3 had Dr. Epps, Dr. Clack, Dr. Runkov, and Dr. Safa.
I think I can go. So we were discussing within the same term that as the other teams, and our idea was that, well, we probably can ask for some flexibility in scheduling, since the not just the nurse's situation and coordinator situation changed, but also the patient might have non-standard schedule outside of normal 8 to 4 working hours, so we can do that as well. Probably ask the PI to share some of the load and do some of the interviews if they can.
Excellent, thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
I think we have one more group, right, Lauren?
Yep, and then the last group had Dr. Rendos, Dr. Roll, and Dr. Fisher.
Yeah, I think we just discussed pretty much a team meeting to reorganize in terms of scheduling and in terms of responsibility, and just to see how everybody could fit everything in their schedules in terms of meeting the deadlines and what works best for everybody, and to try to transfer some of those things that may be done by the in-person person to someone that is home. So potentially reorganizing not only time-wise, but responsibility-wise as well.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I think this scenario, I'm sure Nate has some feedback as well. This scenario is one that kind of hit on a lot of our different areas. So you're talking about communication, which a lot of you mentioned being a need to help address this. It could be, role clarity, where some things have changed and it looks like, workload has shifted, and there might need to be some clarity about who needs to be doing what as things have changed. And also goals and means clarity. So we have specific goals in this time. How are we supposed to be achieving these goals when some of our capacity might have shifted due to personal issues, childcare issues, differences or changes in work schedule, and definitely in terms of the frameworks for action. I mean, change management was the first one that popped out to me, because so many things, as we've said before, related to the pandemic and going to virtual and changes in schedule and different things could be a way to potentially approach this. Nate, what are your thoughts on this scenario?
Yeah, this is one that I like to start with, because I think Team 1 said there's not conflict yet, but certainly you see in this the potential for conflict between people whose jobs have already changed or are feeling overburdened. Some may be feeling like I'm carrying too much. So it has the potential to create problems in the cohesiveness. And as Aaron mentioned, the changes in roles that have already happened, and then those means clarity. We know what our goals are, but now the way that we get there has been forced to change.
Sure.
So do we need to shift our goals and be a little more realistic? Do we need to consider other ways to work together? So I like that team framework as a way to think through. And most of you chose, clearly were thinking solution-oriented and collaborative in your approach. And yet some people may be tempted at times to take more of an authority role and to come in and say, I've worked out a plan, here it is. Here's what we're going to do.
Right.
So this is kind of teeing up the fact that sometimes the conflict is not yet interpersonal, but there is conflict here in that there's now a misalignment between how work is getting done and what your goals are.
Exactly.
And so recognizing that and being able to be proactive can be really important to maintain good teamwork. So I thought this was a good opportunity to introduce this framework, which is often used in the negotiation teaching. And it's a way to think about different styles or approaches to working out a problem or working towards a goal, keeping in mind how important the outcome is on the vertical axis and how important the relationship is on the horizontal axis. So you might think on the extremes that, for example, if you're going to negotiate buying a car, your relationship with the dealer probably is not all that important, but the outcome is important to you. You want the car you want for the price you want. So there you may be more in the mode of, I'm going to compete here for the lowest price, and I may do that by getting additional offers that I'm bringing to the table and being willing to walk away. And so you have your whole strategy there around how I'm going to manage this negotiation. On the other hand, if your relationship is super important, but the outcome is not so important, let's say it's which restaurant we're going to order dinner from tonight. Here, do I need to compete with my spouse and my family on this? Or in fact, this is a time where maybe it's to my advantage to accommodate their wishes if someone feels strongly about that in favor of maintaining the relationship. Of course, I will say that because the emotions that can come with conflict, we're all tempted to avoid, and I'm a card-carrying member of avoiding conflict because it's just very uncomfortable. And that's probably where you want to be if neither is important, right? Is why suit up in your armor to fight when it's just not worth it? So avoiding is to be used seldom unless the stakes are just so low and it's just meaningless. Now there's this compromise bucket. So if both are important, you may be tempted to work out a compromise, and that often is a pretty good place to be. However, in a compromise situation, neither side got exactly what they wanted, and often you're settling for less a little bit. It's sometimes said that the best outcome of buying or selling a house is that both sides feel like they didn't get quite what they wanted out of that. So a compromise sounds like a good thing, but in fact, it may not be achieving what you'd really like to get out of it. So when both things are important, ideally being in a collaborative mode is what we can achieve, because sometimes the solution is one we haven't even envisioned. We've kind of staked out what we want to achieve, but maybe the options are beyond what we've realized. And so by collaborating, we may actually build something better than either party thought would happen. I was at a class once where I heard a story about a company that had a lot of property holdings and had decided it was a little too diverse in its work and wanted to sell a portion of the business just so they could focus on the parts that were more profitable. So they ended up entering into a negotiation with someone else who they thought might buy these properties, and through that negotiation recognized a really synergistic business opportunity to work together. So instead of selling the properties, they became partners in a new business that ended up being very, very profitable. So being able to be open to the opportunities to collaborate and build something new are really key. So in this kind of situation where we've got a conflict because something, COVID has imposed new constraints on how we work together and new burdens on some team members, if we can enter into a place where we're collaborative about what the options might be, we may come up with solutions that, as one of you said, are beyond the 8 to 4 hours, or perhaps there's a shifting of workload or changing how the work gets done. And that may mean renegotiating what roles people have and how they get there. Something to add to this slide that's often taught in business schools is about the BATNA, and the BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Because sometimes when you're trying to negotiate, you're not actually achieving what you want. And you need to know, first of all, what's your least acceptable solution. But secondly, it's good to be looking down the road a bit and to say, so if we're not able to achieve a workable solution here, what's my fallback? What's my best alternative? So imagine that you're going to approach your boss for a raise, right? So your best alternative may just be, well, I go back and put my nose to the grindstone and accept the salary I'm given, and I'm okay with that. So being at peace with that is one BATNA. But another might be that, let's say you've been thinking about whether you would consider a move. So maybe my alternative, my fallback is that if I don't get what I'm hoping for through my discussion with my department chair, maybe then I put my resume out there and I consider interviewing for some other jobs. So being aware of that before you enter into this discussion can be useful. Not that you're competing again, for a solution here, but just being aware of what the alternative might be if you're struggling to get people on board and to identify something new. So I wanted to come back to the Crucial Conversations framework, and the Crucial Conversations book I find to be very helpful. It's been used for years. It's kind of an interesting book. I heard a talk once by one of the authors where it's a group of psychologists who got together to study business and what was effective in business. And so they, as part of what they did was they interviewed a lot of folks and wanted to ask, what is it about people who are successful that is key? And they ended up coming up and recognizing that there was a set of characteristics that people who are highly effective in organizations tended to have. And so they shifted the focus of their research towards those characteristics. And it was the ability in these kinds of critical moments when emotions are high, stakes are high, and people are disagreeing, it was the ability to say something that moved the conversation in a more productive direction instead of letting it get off the rails. And it's a very high emotional intelligence quotient that's helping to engage, but it's a set of skills that are useful. And in any of these kind of circumstances, no matter when you're dealing with conflict, no matter where you start, you may find yourself in a moment that has these characteristics. Right? If you were entering what you thought was going to be a collaborative conversation, but someone in that room is feeling threatened, that suddenly the stakes may go up, and you may find yourself needing to use crucial conversations skills here. So to remind ourselves of why things are so challenging in communication, the ideal situation is that we're able to convey the meaning that we have from ourselves to other people very directly. And we're going to do that through both our verbal and nonverbal communications. What's interesting is how much of the meaning is actually transmitted through nonverbal means. So for example, if you're in a clinical situation, you may have learned that the best way to do a handoff from one person to another is to do that face-to-face, because so much of the information is contained in the tone of your voice, in the look on your face, your sense of worry or your sense of confidence. And so it's recommended that people get together and do that in person instead of doing it through email or telephone call. So ideally, we're going to convey that meaning directly. It's not that simple, though. We all know that there's challenges to this. And one of the biggest challenges is that if I'm the one trying to communicate to you, I have a set of conditions around me. Those conditions may be how I'm feeling in the moment, whether I'm distracted, whether I'm in a situation where there's a lot of information in the environment, and so I'm not as focused as I could be. Have I been in a situation before and I'm carrying some baggage from that? So all of these things are my conditions as I'm trying to convey my meaning, and they're going to affect the words I use and the nonverbal cues that I'm sending. The trouble is too that on the receiving end, you've got your own set of conditions, right? And I don't know in any moment what's going on for you and what your background is here. And then let's add the other pieces of communication that we know about. First is perception. Do I even receive what you're sending? Did I hear you? Did I understand you? Did I pick up on all the words and the cues, or was I in fact looking at my phone while you were talking, so I missed how your brow wrinkled? So there's the perception piece. And then there's the interpretation piece. So I got the information in through my senses, but now what meaning am I making of those? What sense am I making of those? So all of this leads to a much more convoluted path for the meaning to be transmitted from one person to another. In the Crucial Conversations model, what they say is the most productive approach here is to create a shared pool of meaning so that both parties can wrestle with the information, can ask clarifying questions, can make sure they're basically on the same page. You want this pool to be as large as it can be. And then around that pool, you need a zone that's safe for dialogue so that you can actually do that work of trying to understand the other person's meaning and come to a shared understanding. When things go wrong, they may be going wrong in one of two major directions. The first, they talk about veering towards violence. And violence is where you've got things like someone attacks someone else for what they're saying or what they're doing, or someone is trying to control the conversation. If you've ever been in a situation where someone says, I'm not going to talk about that, you know, they're creating boundaries and rules around what you're talking about, or they talk over you and don't let you speak. And that's a controlling approach. And then there's labeling, right, which is a way of labeling you so that it undermines your credibility. So as an internal medicine doctor, I heard plenty of times, coming through medical school and my medical training, especially from surgeons, things like, they would label us as being people who were indecisive and didn't understand their world, and they cut stuff out and cured people, and they criticized us for talking things to death. On the other hand, we would say, well, the surgeon's not going to think about it. If they can't take it out, they don't care about it. So we would label each other, and that diminishes our ability to come to a shared pool of meaning. The other way things can go wrong is veering off towards silence. So silence behaviors are things like avoiding the conversation, or if you're in a conversation and it gets uncomfortable, you deflect, you go a different direction, or just withdraw. And then there's masking, which is behaviors where you do something like crack a joke or become sarcastic or do other things that again diverts the conversation away from what's productive because it's been uncomfortable. And going either direction is not allowing you to engage in the kind of productive conversation that you need to have. And that can be all sorts of situations happening. It can be trying to negotiate with someone to be collaborative. It can be that time where you're giving feedback and the person has become defensive, or you're doing an evaluation and they're coming up with excuses, or there's a behavior that someone is exhibiting that you're asking them to correct, but they're not engaging with you on it. So being mindful of not only the meaning and the conversation you're happening, but taking that step back and looking at the big picture and saying, are we engaged in the kind of conversation we need to be, or have we been hijacked by our emotions or by a distracting behavior that's happening? And how can I get our conversation back into this shared dialogue? Through this, it's also helpful to keep in mind how we get to where we are. A couple of context here. One is called the ladder of inference, and these two are similar, the ladder to inference and path to action. I borrowed this from the ladder of inference from a friend of mine, but it's about how we subconsciously and automatically go from facts to interpretations to then generalizing on those interpretations and finally characterizing the other person based on that. So an example of this might be, let's say that the dean has called a meeting and it sent out an email and said it's very critical that absolutely everyone is at this meeting on time. I have an important announcement to make. We're going to be starting at 8 a.m. And so you're there, sitting in the room pre-COVID, let's say, or maybe this time like now in Zoom that you send you're sitting there you see your friend, I see my friend Aaron in the room with us, and then the dean starts speaking, and he talks about this important message, and then I see 10 minutes into the meeting, Kathy shows up, right? And so I send a private chat to Aaron, and I say, Aaron, can you believe that Kathy's late? I mean, she got the same email that we all did. Now that I think about it, she's often not on time. I think she just doesn't care. She's not invested. So very quickly, you can see where I've gone all the way up this ladder to characterizing Kathy as someone who's not invested like we are. So let me ask you, and you can put it in the chat box or call it out loud. What were the facts about that situation?
Kathy was late to the meeting.
All right. So everybody agree that the fact is Kathy was late to the meeting? Yeah. Now, let's say that the dean sent Kathy an email and said to email to her privately, Kathy, I know that you're going to be, you have a meeting at 7:30 that's super critical to our mission. And what I'm talking about will pertain to you more halfway through the hour. So it's fine if you join us late. Be there by 8:30 if you can. So now what's the fact? Or in fact, what's the interpretation? The fact is that Kathy entered the room at 8:10. But now the interpretation is Kathy was 20 minutes early. So you can see how easy this is. We're not even aware of the fact that we go from facts to interpretation. The interpretation becomes our facts, right? And I think we're living through this now politically. On the path to action side, those facts often to us have a story with them. And we're human beings who always create context in our world, and our stories matter to us. It's often how we perceive the world. And those stories often have very strong feelings with them. And actually from neuroscience, we know that the stronger the feelings were, the emotions were, at the time a past event happened to us, the more it is that we remember it. And then our feelings can drive our actions. So for example, I found myself at times when confronted with something unexpected, and an example of this was once I was about to walk into a patient's room who was delirious and had HIV and end-stage liver disease, and had started pulling his IVs out. So as I was entering the room, I could see there was blood all over the sheets. And as I walked in the room, the nurse standing outside just jumped on me and said, "You need to do something with this patient right now." And was verbally very aggressive towards me. And I recognized right away that it was because she was fearful about all the blood in the room and the patient's uncontrollable behavior, and a very appropriate type of fear she was feeling, but it was coming across as aggression. Well, in the group of us was the charge nurse who was able to get control of the situation, because he looked at me and he saw me getting really flustered. And when I get flustered, my scalp glows red. And so everybody around me knows I'm upset, I'm angry, or whatever. And so I was about to jump back at her. And he recognized that this would be counterproductive. I think it was his years as a psychiatric nurse that made a difference. And by the way, he was about 6'7" and 300 pounds. So, and all muscle. So he just reached out and put his arm on my shoulder and he said, "Dr. Spell, we're going to be okay here," and calmed the situation down, because somehow in me that being confronted and being attacked in that moment, my response was to defend myself and to attack back. So these things happen automatically. They're actually adaptive behaviors that we have so that we move quickly when we're in times of danger. But they can lead us in these moments, if we're not aware of this happening, to be unproductive in our dialogue. So in the Crucial Conversations model, they talk about a couple of tool sets to remember, just to as you recognize these situations, keep the conversation moving back towards something productive. So the AMP model down at the bottom, these are techniques that are helpful when you're deeply listening to try to have the other party really share what they care about. The first is to ask a clarifying question, especially asking it in a non-judgmental way. Show curiosity, and that can help the person speak to what's going on. Mirroring is where you simply repeat back the same words. So if we're having a conversation and I just say back to you one or two words like, "You were angry," or whatever, that's using your same language, it sends the message to the other person that I'm listening to you. Paraphrase is sort of like that. It's where you summarize what the other person has said in your own words and say it back to them. And this is intended also to show that, yes, I've been listening, I've heard you, I've synthesized this, and I understand what you mean. The purpose of, if you can paraphrase something back to somebody, they say, yeah, that's what you're looking for. That means I've really got it. We understand each other. And then priming is used in the situations where the other person's speaking, they're not getting to the point, they're maybe talking around it, or perhaps they're just not able to articulate what they mean, but you think you have an idea of what the issue is. You can take a bit of a risk and prime them by saying, is the problem that X? And that's just opening up that opportunity to talk about the thing that so far they've been unable to name. So these are a set of skills that help with the deep listening part. The state model is where you're using that model for the path to action about your own story, is to share your facts. Kathy, I noticed that you came in at 8:10. Right, so and then tell your story. I was so nervous because I know the dean cared that we all get there on time, that I was worried that that others might think you didn't care about it or something like that. So that's telling your story about it, and then ask the other person what was true for them, what was going on for them, what were their facts, what was their journey, so that you can hopefully come to an understanding. Talk tentatively simply means to be open to their interpretation and test hypotheses. So again, just ways to try to stay in dialogue when it's been hard to have the conversation. Before you get into this kind of crucial conversation, or even using any of these approaches, it can be useful to prepare in advance, to ask yourself some guiding questions. And the first is, what do I think the issues really are? What is the conflict about? So back in our first example of COVID disrupting how our team functions, you might be ready to appreciate the change in roles, the change in stress at home, those sorts of things, and just be prepared to address them. What do I know about the other person's perspective? And if I don't know anything, I need to be sure that I ask about that. Also asking ourselves, how much control does the other person have over these issues? Is it something that they actually do have control over and could change? Or am I frustrated about something that really is outside of their control? So asking them to be responsible for it won't be very productive. We need to take a different approach. Does the conflict affect only me, or is there a broader impact? So sometimes this is an interpersonal conflict that doesn't need to be addressed by anyone else. At other times, you're recognizing, particularly if you're the team leader, you're recognizing that someone's behavior is affecting other members of the team. So that may lead you to take a different approach. In those situations, perhaps I need to get some other perspectives before I approach this person. And then do I need to approach them by myself, or should we approach this in a team conversation? And then back to point 5 with thinking through that grid around the importance of relationship versus importance of the outcome, just so that you're aware and you're thoughtful about what sort of approach to take. Through this all, Aaron mentioned earlier, keeping your values and goals in mind. Well, some of the values that are helpful in all of these types of approaches are these. One is to own your own contribution to the conflict. Because in a team, particularly that cohesiveness is about being able to be vulnerable with each other and honest with each other. And this is really key. Value the other person and assume good intent. There are times when we're really upset about what's happened, or we feel insulted about what's happened. Can I manage through this by still valuing the other person as a person, even if I didn't like what they did, I was disgusted by it. Can I value them? So that leaves open the opportunity to preserve the relationship or even build on something out of this and have growth for the other person and for myself. Can I commit to not avoiding the conflict when I should not avoid the conflict, and then focus on what I can change instead of just airing grievances.
Yeah, I think that assumed good intent is probably one of the more challenging ones, at least that I've seen in my experience, particularly when there have been a history of potential conflicts or issues with the individual or a group, that coming into each individual circumstance, each individual conflict, assuming until proven otherwise that the other person has good intent, or at least approaching it that way, is very valuable and also very challenging.
Yeah, and I think too, the if you're surprised by the conflict, as I mentioned, often we don't have the time to think through these things. Mm-hmm. So taking a step back allows us to think about, how do I appreciate the other person? Something that I've always taken to heart for any of you who've read the book, The House of God, the third rule of the House of God is, in a cardiac arrest situation, the first procedure is to take your own pulse. I think that's very good advice for these kind of situations that we're in. It's to be aware of our own feelings, take a step back, a deep breath, and try to put yourself in the right frame of mind to move forward. So with all of this as background in our previous discussion, we've got a few other scenarios that we'll put forward, and maybe we can talk them through. We can do this as one big group if you'd like to do that. So why don't we move into these? So here's one, and I'll just read it out. You're looking for a new manager for your laboratory. Your business manager suggests that you interview the wife of a newly hired faculty member who is looking for just such a position. During the interview, you're impressed with her technical skills and interest in your projects. She can start right away, and since you need someone as soon as possible, you offer her the job on the spot. Her online reference check comes back with lukewarm reviews, but you decide to move forward anyway. You welcome her into the lab, and she begins to work on your project. You quickly learn that she's not a good fit. She has her own ideas how to do things and refuses to learn the tried and true methods used in the lab. The final straw comes about a month into her employment when she tells you she can only perform an assay if you buy a $50,000 piece of equipment so that she can replace your method with hers. So let's just think about this a little bit, open up mics or type something into the chat. And maybe kind of going back to Aaron's rubric with the first scenario, what's at issue here? What are the issues?
Well, one of the issues here is that when you approach this conflict with her, it's remembering, I mean, one of the things that comes to my mind is that she's the wife of this newly hired faculty member. So that's something to keep in mind. And not that it should change how you approach it, but it's certainly a factor.
Yeah, that raises the stakes on it, doesn't it? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, I think that her online reference come back with lukewarm reviews. Also, you know, you try to enter a relationship in an unbiased way, but you already have that background on her. Maybe you could have head off the conflict early on, knowing that there was a potential area that could create conflict.
Yeah, and I know Aaron, being the HR expert, may have some things to contribute here. But one problem is that now you're stuck, because if you were going to do that, you should have done that. So you've learned a valuable lesson, but you're now in a situation where you've already accepted the reviews.
Yeah, we could have a whole nother probably 2 hours talking about this one scenario from an HR perspective with the importance of, you know, proper hiring procedures and reference checks, but I'll save that for a different training.
Yeah, so in the chat, an honest conversation into the different methodologies could be a good start. Yeah, so that's where you're thinking about, you know, that deep listening. Let me understand the other person's perspective. I'm upset with their behavior, but perhaps they have something to contribute. So being open to that is one potential approach. And then several of you are talking about role expectations, right? So if you're the PI in the lab, you're the one who's ultimately responsible for determining the methodology and what approach are you going to take with your research. And the role for this person is not to supplant your judgment potentially. So that having that relationship around decision making is key. And I'll have a slide in just a moment around decision making.
I think someone in the chat just jumped in and said, with a couple of questions, is the new method better? And does the lab have resources to allocate? I think that kind of goes back to what was initially said about the relationship with this person and also the relationship that she is the spouse of a faculty member. You know, it might push you more toward, you know, the relationship being valuable and the outcome being something that is important. So you might be more in that, you know, collaboration mode, or at least start there if possible, which I think this questions that Dr. Safa has brought up. Is the new method better, and does the lab have resources? Almost makes it seem like, hey, don't forget that the relationship could be important and the outcome important. So it might be an opportunity to at least begin in a collaboration mindset, which is typically not what we hear in this scenario, but I think is very important to at least consider.
Yeah. There's, you know, looking at this, there's also a hint that, because it says the final straw, there's a hint that this sort of behavior has been happening along the way, but no indication that you've addressed it yet.
Right.
So things have been perhaps building up to a head, and so that can lead to the emotions being higher and potentially the stakes being higher around this. And it raises a question for me. What expectations were set early on, and were there discussions about this, or is this the first time we're going to be entering into a dialogue around the issues here?
Yeah, I think back to the framework, Nate. I mean, this could fall into so many different ones. It could be communication, you know, like clear expectations up front. It could be goals and means, where, you know, we have a clear goal of you know, trying to complete this project, this paper. You know, the new person might come in thinking we have this goal and I have this great way to do it, but it involves $50,000 in new equipment, and you maybe did not clearly communicate that we don't have the means to add on additional expenses. I think it does kind of fall into a number of different factors in that high functioning team framework.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's times too, and when we don't know yet here in this scenario, that what we're seeing is a window into someone's personality. And, you know, it's right now it's the issue of the methodology, but, you know, maybe next month or the month after, it's some new issue. And so there's, you know, it could be that there's a power dynamic problem or other sort of issue underneath that will come out. So these can be really, really challenging situations to deal with. I do want to share a couple of additional paradigms to think about. So we talked here about setting expectations and that teamwork grid around how decisions are made in terms of the role and the means clarity. I like this grid a lot. It was the same colleague who shared the ladder of inference shared this grid with me years ago, and it's reminding us to be intentional to let everybody know how a decision is going to be made, so that we're on the same page about that. And let's say that you and I are in some sort of relationship where we've got times that we make decisions that affect one another. Well, on one extreme, you know, I make a decision, I don't have to tell you, for example, what I chose to wear this morning. You see it, but I didn't have to ask your permission or talk to you about it, and likewise for you. So those kind of things are ones that we have complete authority over. In the very middle, there's decisions that we make jointly, or we're not going to move forward, and having clarity there too. An example of this might be, and this is just something that happened in our family years ago, where the husband in the relationship went out and purchased a new car. It happened to be a Ford Granada. And if you were alive in the 1970s, you may remember this being the era of lemons coming out of Detroit. So brought home this green Ford Granada with a vinyl top and said to his wife, "Look, honey, what I've bought for you." And she smiled and said, "Thank you, that's nice." But what she really felt was, how dare you spend a huge chunk of money without talking to me first, and us making this decision together. So she clearly felt like this was a joint decision. He felt like this was something that he could do on his own and then inform her about. And so it ended up being a point of contention and led to conflict down the road. And it's you know, when the car started leaking through the roof and rusting out and growing mushrooms in the back seat, it became an "I told you so" situation. So clarity can be an important thing. You see on the grid here, I make the decision and then I inform you, I consult with you, but the decision is ultimately mine. Or I make the decision and then you must approve it, and then vice versa on the other side. So for example, a decision where I make the decision and you must approve might be one where I choose my vacation time, but if you're my boss, you're going to have to approve that, right? So having clarity around the decision making can be very useful. The other thing that's nice about this grid is that you can be thoughtful about where a person is in their development. The idea here is to share as much authority with the other person. If you're their leader, share as much authority as is appropriate with them. And as they gain maturity and experience and expertise, you can let them have more independence. I think about, for example, being on an inpatient service with my freshly minted interns in July of the year. They just graduated medical school. And here we are prescribing drugs that can kill people: insulin, blood thinners, opiates, right? So in those situations, I'm very clear with them and I tell them, I want you to decide what you want to give, but clear it with me first. So this is, you know, you make the decision, but I must approve it. Or maybe even, and then I say, you know, if you have any questions about it, consult with me before you make the decision. So this way, we have clarity around it. On the other hand, if it's June of the next year, 11 months have passed, they've gained a lot of experience. And if now I'm having them bring me every order for medication that could be of some risk, I'm slowing them down. They're going to be frustrated because they can't exercise the autonomy that they've earned. So having clarity around it and communicating that clarity can be really important. And then this framework is one that's, it can be helpful when you've got a behavior or an issue that needs to be ultimately corrected. So this framework you would use when you need to exercise your authority role. You've tried other things, it hasn't been successful. You've been collaborative, it hasn't quite worked. So now you need to make sure that there's definite change. So edicts is the framework. The E is for the expectation. What was the expectation of that person? D is how they deviated from it, right? I told you that you need to clear these kind of purchasing decisions with me, or methods decisions with me before moving forward, but you didn't. You went ahead and acted on it. So that's the deviation. The improvement is being clear about what you expect in the future. C is for consequences if a person fails to meet those new expectations or to improve. T is the timeline across which you expect the new behavior to be in place. And then S is for surveillance. How will I know that things have changed? And this may be, if it's not a behavior that you're witnessing all the time, it may be that we're going to meet every month and review X, Y, or Z, whatever it happened to be. Review the budget, review the methods you're using, or whatever else. So it's just providing you that kind of framework. And you know, I've seen and been in plenty of situations, particularly when I was on the hospital executive team, that we'd get into a situation where there'd been a performance issue on someone's behalf, and it's been going on for a while, but they hadn't gotten any feedback, there hadn't been clarity, and there wasn't documentation about what had gone on before. But now the supervisor is really upset and wants them punished or fired. And I'll appreciate Aaron pitching in here that, you know, that if you are to this point where you have provided feedback to someone or other means that hasn't improved things, you want to be clear around how you're approaching it and have that documentation.
Yeah, and again, this is another area where I could spend all day coaching on this thing that kind of tips into the HR scales. But I think this framework is so beneficial and important for that reason. So we have the ability to say that we have already had these conversations where we have laid clear expectations, discussed where the deviation happened, given clear expectations for improvement, but also resulted or giving clear expectations about what the consequences could be. And then of course, set that timeline and talked about surveillance. Typically, whenever HR is brought in, this is the counsel that we give, whether it be an informal verbal conversation, whether we're at the point of having to do something more, you know, in documentation or more formal. The conversations and the documentation typically follow this framework where we're talking about exactly what happened, how it didn't meet the expectation, what the consequence is, and then what the timeline for improvement is. So I think this is the one that kind of fits into this HR wheelhouse, maybe more commonly than any other, even though they're all very, very useful.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing you fall back on when other approaches haven't been useful, or if you really absolutely need to correct what's happening because it's come to light and can't be tolerated.
Right.
All right, so we've got a couple of additional scenarios, and what we're planning to do is to give you guys a break, and so we'll go for maybe another 15 minutes or so with just these last two. Along the way, though, we certainly invite any questions or dialogue, or actually let me pause and ask, do any of you have your own scenarios that you'd like for us to talk about together before we bring up these other couple of scenarios? Okay, so hearing none, we'll consider this one. So you hire a new coordinator, Xana, to work on your research team. During the interview, you indicated you are flexible concerning work hours, but you prefer that Xana schedule her time so she's present at least part of the time when others are in the office. At first, everything goes well, and Xana comes early every day. Then she starts to have some issues at home, and you notice that she sometimes comes in at 12 and leaves at 4. Moreover, others on the team complain about her attitude. She's often abrupt, even rude, and refuses to help with anything beyond her stated job duties, although her work is of high quality. Things come to a head when the fellow in the lab starts copying you on every email rather than communicate with her directly. When you try to talk with her about the issues, she denies there's a problem with attendance or with working with others. So let's pause and ask, what are some of the issues and what sorts of approaches and frameworks would you consider?
I mean, given the feedback from the lab, I would start to question some honesty. Right, because like the lab is saying that there are clear like timing issues and all.
Mm-hmm.
I would be concerned that maybe there's something going on at home that's affecting her ability to do her job, you know, in the context that was asked. Although I think it's important to note that it says her work is of high quality, so she's getting her work done, but maybe there's just something outside of work that's affecting her general attitude and her coping ability.
Good.
And yeah. I think that the fact that her work is of high quality is something that you could bring to the table in having this conversation where you're building a common ground and being like, you've been doing good work and allow that to be a bridge between you as you discuss the other things. And then I think the other thing I'll say is that the fellow, I mean, another issue is that the fellow immediately starting to CC you, like generally CCing is a kind of an, I don't want to even call it passive aggressive. It's just, it's passive aggressive, but it's fairly aggressive too. And so that I think it just undermines the relationship in itself. So that was never going to help things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight that there's some clues here that the pathology goes a little beyond Xana, right? There's some team dysfunctioning that's happening. Right. And from this scenario, our information is limited. If you're the PI, you're getting a story, some interpretation about her being rude, but you don't necessarily have your own personal experience of the facts that happened. Being open to the fact that there may be many more sides to this story or much deeper issues going on. And I really liked the thought about considering her own personal wellness, and are there potentially other stressors that are here. And someone may or may not feel open to talking about those. And what looks like potential dishonesty could be someone who is scared or embarrassed or otherwise trying to contain information they're not ready to share. So there's all sorts of issues that are potentially going on here, and this is one that feels to me like there needs to be open opinion, caring to understand, be able to get a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, I agree, Nate. I think it's one of those things in my experience where I've seen a lot of the PIs who, you have these research labs, you have individuals who you hire to work very autonomously and you expect them to do so. So you might not come in, having observed some of the things or some of the reports on your own. So I think initially being able to have that conversation to gain understanding of what's happening, to get those facts. And I think to Jacqueline's point of being able to note, hey, the quality of the work I'm seeing is very high quality. So we really, value that, but also seeking to gain understanding of what could be potentially going on in some other areas, whether it be attendance, whether it be a lack of role clarity, where others are expecting you to chip in with these other assignments, these other projects. Your understanding of your role is that you are 100% focused on this one area. So I think it could be some of that role clarity in there as well. The approach of having that initial conversation with fact finding and maybe a reinforcement or some explanation of role, I think could be very beneficial in this scenario.
Mm-hmm. There's an opportunity here also for feedback, but I think this case highlights some potential pitfalls of feedback too. So the general principle when giving feedback is it needs to be about observed behaviors, and ideally behaviors you have directly observed or performance you've directly observed. So what you have observed is the high quality nature of her work. So that's one where you can absolutely feel confident in giving feedback around that. You're hearing about other issues where she's been described as abrupt or rude and refusing to do anything beyond her stated job duties. And just that word refusing is already pejorative. So that's the kind of area where I would be very careful or very hesitant to provide feedback about that, because you haven't witnessed that yourself. And whatever it was interpreted as being abrupt, rude, or refusing to be helpful may be quite different in her perspective. So I think the feedback model is not all that helpful yet in this situation. It may be that down the road you set up some opportunities to be more directly observing of interactions and other things so that you can provide that feedback, but it's a little premature to use a feedback model here.
I have a question. So what if the conflict is between the majority of the group and one person who is seemingly doing a very good job according to some standards, but maybe in the given research lab situation, the spirit of being collaborative and everyone just getting along well with each other is way more important. Like, what if the stated job is not sufficient to maintain the high caliber of the expected research outcome of that lab? And the dynamics of the entire group is being compromised, even though on paper, the performance of this one individual is sound. So what would you do there? Like, you just like say, all right, like that person is fine and the rest of the group should like change their behavior or tolerate more? Like,
Yeah,
what
so
do you do in those situations?
let's open it up and ask what the rest of you think about that. I think that's a very important point to raise. So how, given what you see here, how might you approach this issue with your team?
I would just call up everybody and talk openly about it. And that way we are not biased to individual interpretation. And that way we give opportunity to clear everything. And everybody comes to a common term. I would talk to everybody together.
I would first conduct individual talking before a group talking, though, just in case the fact that at the end of the description she denies that there is a problem and so on. If as a group everyone denies or like goes into conflict right away, it might become unproductive. So maybe individual talking, like one-on-one, and then a group talking, indeed, like to assess the different point of view.
Great. And Lara? Lara, raise your hand.
Yes, thank you. So, you know, my read on this scenario is that we have a person who has a little bit of personal problems, but who is willing to join the team and is doing a great job. However, it seems like she has not integrated well into the team. And perhaps there is some of it is my fault as the PI for not sort of team building or making it clear that she's going to have a flexible schedule. And perhaps the flexible schedule that we had discussed in the beginning is not working for her anymore. And maybe we should have another conversation as to what would work for her while as well working for the other team members, so they don't feel like they're the ones who are not getting a better treatment. So I feel like, you know, a little bit of, okay, you know, maybe let's get the team together, some team building activities, getting to understand the other person's point of view as discreetly as possible, and being able to sort of work together as a team might be where I would go with this next.
Yeah, I'm really glad you say that. I think you bring up a lot of great points. So I love the, oh great, Lillian, I invite you to jump in, and if you've got a specific around this that you want to say.
Well, I just sent a text to the group. Admittedly, I've not been able to pay 100% attention, but I have been listening, and I really think that this has been really amazing. I think you guys have done a great job, and it's very nuanced. I think one of the things that happens is we react emotionally to conflict situations, and that's kind of a natural evolutionary process. And with that comes a lot of assumptions. And so I love the picture where you've got one person's head and then a crazy line going to the other person's head, right? So, you know, we put our own spin on things. We tend to like people who are similar to ourselves. So when someone approaches a situation, and if there's underlying differences between us, whether they're kind of surface level differences like race or gender or background, or deep level differences like personality, those things just can really amplify. And so, you know, a lot of what you talked about is very consistent with the assessment that people did back in August or September, I can't remember when it was, where they were really evaluating their own style of relating. And so I hope that this kind of brings that together, but truly this has been a great session. And I was just looking over your slides that Lauren sent me, and I really think they're fantastic.
Well, thank you for that endorsement. It's always a little potentially intimidating to have a psychologist in the room to call our bluff, but thank you. So yeah, this particular scenario I think is really valuable, because in it, you begin to understand that you don't have the full picture. And I forget who it was, said something about if your team values collaboration and you think the collaboration is actually a really important outcome, not just the work product, but how the work is done, because that will affect your future ability to generate new ideas and have people work together. If that's an important outcome to you, you're going to have to get involved in the messy parts of this, which are culture building, because culture doesn't happen just because you say we're all collaborative, right? We think that's important, right? Because people are going to nod their heads and say, yeah. But culture is is the behaviors you see every day. And if the behaviors you're seeing are people talking behind each other's backs, seeming to say there's one person here who's the problem, maybe that's true. Maybe one person came in and is really upsetting the apple cart, but maybe there's other issues that are deeper. So it is messy. There may not be easy solutions here, but approaching it with the willingness to get involved and to take that on is what ultimately is going to be needed if you need to repair how the team is functioning beyond just addressing one person.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add something, and you may have mentioned this, but one of the things that we talked about in my session earlier in the fall is that collaboration takes a lot of time, right? And so sometimes you have to deal with situations in the moment and address issues, whatever that might be, whether it's giving in to the individual you're in conflict with, or whether you're avoiding the situation to get something done in the moment. But you can always come back to collaboration later. But I think that, as busy as we all are, and given the roles that we all have, collaboration, you have to consider really carefully how much time that's going to take. And I think the other thing I would say, because I've done a lot of executive coaching myself, is that oftentimes people present these scenarios that are really awful, right? And so I would just remind all of you that you have choices, and sometimes the choices are difficult. Like, I can no longer work with this individual, or I have to make a decision to let someone go on my team. And so I guess, sometimes situations are bad enough that they might warrant taking more extreme actions, but I would just encourage all of you to realize that you always have choices, and that's not going to be your first choice. But those kinds of decisions are probably going to need to be made sometime in your professional career. And so I kind of throw that out there, because often people will describe situations that really do just seem so awful, there's no way out, particularly if it's an issue of a culture that doesn't fit with your personality. And sometimes unfortunately, sometimes the solution is you have to find a culture that's a better fit for you, because changing those things is really, really difficult, even if you're the leader of that organization.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. There's this phenomenon when patients do what we call catastrophizing, which is whatever the issue is, it's blown up as if it's the end of the world. But it can be really detrimental to teams to ignore. And so it's very critical that you're not doing the conflict avoiding that is more comfortable, but you're recognizing that this is a situation that's going to take some work. It's not the work that was directly achieving the result, but it's the work about how does the team function, how do individuals function, how do they problem solve on their own? Particularly, it's because here I do get the sense too that people are kicking the problem to you as the PI, right? They haven't addressed it on their own. That's an opportunity, or a huge opportunity, for team building, because you actually want to develop people who are going to be independent contributors and solve the problems instead of you having to be the one who's reaching in and solving everything. So I think this has been a great way for us to kind of wrap up rather than go to that last scenario. I've sent all the slides to Lauren, and you're all welcome to have them and to read through. But let's just stop and pause and ask, are there any last thoughts or questions or anything that we should clarify? I think we've scared everyone into video silence.
That does happen sometimes.
Yeah.
Lauren, I think we have probably 15 minutes. So did we decide we wanted to give people a chance to take a bio break maybe, and then come back at 11 for our speed networking?
That sounds great.
Okay, so if everyone can just please try to be back at 11 so we can get started. I'm assuming that some of you that are going to be, who get into the mentoring challenges group first, my guess is a lot of these issues that you've been discussing will reemerge. But for those of you that are in the other areas, we can also revisit any of the things that Aaron and Nate just covered. But I do want to thank you so much for contributing. I think this has just been wonderful, and we'll give everyone 15, and we'll see you back here promptly at 11.
Thank you all so much.
Well, that was, I thought, great conversation, at least with my groups. I welcome any of you guys to reach out, certainly to me. I think I can probably speak for Carlos and Kathy if you have any follow-up questions. But great discussion, really a lot of similarities across the groups in my mind, but also some different issues that people were struggling with. And so, there's no roadmap here to being a faculty member. And especially for those of you that are making that initial transition from being a graduate student or a fellow to a faculty member, it's just hard, right? And so, feel free to lean on us in the program and other people that you feel close to, and your peers to get the kind of guidance and mentoring support you need. So I want to thank Carlos. I know he's super busy for helping us out and giving us his sage advice. And of course, my partner in crime, Kathy, for doing this as well. So the only other thing I'm going to mention to you is I do want to, whoops, going the wrong way. I do want to mention our annual conference. And so this will be regional, this will be virtual this year. And we are really looking forward to a couple of days together. We often have great representation by fellows and postdocs at this conference. It's an incredible opportunity to network, and we do our best to have some panels that are geared toward junior faculty members and also some opportunities for kind of small group interaction. So if you're interested, I would strongly encourage you to look into this conference. You can find information on the Georgia CTSA website or reach out to Lauren, and she can share this with you as well. The registration fee is really reasonable, so it's very feasible. We all have travel money probably that we haven't been able to spend in the last couple of years. So hope to see you there. We do have some awards for kind of some best works as well. So it's a great opportunity to network and get to know other people. So I encourage you to register for that if it fits your schedule. And we also are really trying to continuously improve this program, but also remember that this is generously supported by the CTSA grant. And as we move into our writing the renewal for the Georgia CTSA, it's really important that we have good evaluation data, not good, like you don't have to provide high ratings, but good evaluation data. I mean, we'd like you to provide high ratings, but more importantly, we just need data. So please, please, please take the opportunity to fill out a very brief evaluation of this event. This is super helpful. We want to make sure that this program continues if the renewal is granted and perhaps even grows. And the only way we can really do that is to make sure we have feedback and know what you liked and didn't like, and we can improve. So this is the QR code for that. I think Lauren's also going to be sending out information by email on this and badgering you if you don't respond. So please take the time to fill this out. It is very brief. And I will.
Lillian, you might need to share your screen. We can't see the QR code.
Oh, that's a bummer. Okay, sorry about that. There you go. Can you see? Yeah. And actually, sorry about that. Here's the information on the conference as well. And I don't know if Lauren's sharing these slides with you, but you can find information about the conference on the Georgia CTSA website. But here's your QR code. So with that, I think we are right at 12. So I'll see if Kathy has any last sage words of advice.
No, just thanks to all of you for spending your morning with us. We hope it was helpful and useful for you. And we're looking forward to seeing your feedback on the evaluation.
Great. Good. Well, you all have a happy Monday, and we will see you at the graduation next time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you for organizing this. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.